Now, for those of us who immediately change the channel or get up to leave the cinema when the end credits kick off, you're often costing yourself a little extra film to enjoy. Before the MCU turned post-credit scenes into easy sequel setups, the horror genre was actually the most synonymous with giving viewers something more after the credits rolled. And that's what we're here to talk about, the best that came after the rest. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 best post-credit scenes in horror movies. Number 10. Constantine. Despite its dour, doomed tone, Constantine ends on a rather surprisingly positive note, with the selfless John Constantine quitting smoking and coming to terms with his purpose in life. Fortunately for fans who like the relatively upbeat send-off, there's a post-credits scene that touches on how the afterlife is actually going for his late pal Chaz. Serving as comic relief for most of the movie, he proves to be surprisingly brave and useful in the climactic psychiatric ward battle and exorcism before being cruelly murdered by the angel Gabriel. Heading off to the cemetery to pay his respects to his fallen friend, Constantine is greeted by the newly angelic version of Chaz, who has clearly found a new way to continue fighting against the forces of darkness. The two exchange a knowing glance before he then flies off. While it doesn't add a huge amount to the plot of the film, this neat little moment provides a nice thematic epilogue to many of its spiritual themes. Number 9. Slither. James Gunn's funny, silly directorial debut takes a borderline childish glee in the grisly mayhem caused by an alien invading a small town in South Carolina. It's grossness galore as most of the town folk become connected to the tentacled monstrosity to form a zombified hive mind. Nathan Fillion's police chief Bill Pardee leaves the painfully few survivors of the onslaught in a daring mission to put a stop to the alien's madness before it spreads across the country. And the post-credit scene here could have been seen as a teaser for a sequel that never happened. Despite its solid cult following these days, Slither was a box office flop at the time. Had its financial fortunes been different though, we may well have got a Slither 2 with a giant alien-possessed cat. As the surviving characters leave the town, a house cat approaches the alien's remains and, rather than being revolted by the twitching gelatinous mass before it, begins to munch on it. As the scene cuts to black, we hear what sounds like the alien infecting the greedy house pet. While it's not a revolutionary post-credit scene by any stretch, it's a fun little epilogue that sits perfectly alongside the dark yet playful tone of the rest of the film. Number 8. Insidious. Now, sometimes less is more. The after-credits scene here is brief but effective in providing one last moment of creepiness from this popular supernatural flick. In a callback to the opener, the Black Bride is seen with a candle once more, this time blowing out the flame. Coming hot off the heels of the chilling revelation that the bride has possessed protagonist Josh Lambert, this quick moment is symbolic of how the plot's panned out. Having spent decades longing to possess Josh, the mysterious bride can now finally put the flame out, so to speak, on its ambition. Between the horrifying twist ending and the post-credits visual, the film course corrects its scare factor after a notoriously messy third act, and it helps remind the viewer of the commendable fear factor that James Wan successfully built up via the haunted house moments and set pieces during the first half of the film. In doing so, it also built anticipation for Insidious Chapter 2, as the viewer wants to know more about who the Black Bride is and also how it's going to be defeated in order to save Josh. Number 7. The Collector. One of the more suspenseful, underrated entries in the much-derided torture horror craze of the late noughties, this twisted, bleak film has an unsavory little gem for those who watch it through to the end credits. The titular Collector is a sadistic, masked menace who kills everyone in a household bar one, who he then adds to his collection. For burglar Arkin, bad luck swings in his direction when the house that he's planned to rob just happens to be the house the Collector is also working that night. The insane amount of traps laid throughout the house for Arkin and the rest of the Collector's hapless victims lends this film a sort of R-rated Home Alone quality. Far from funny though, this sadistic flick hops from one sickening note to the next until, just when we think Arkin's free and heading off to safety via an ambulance, the Collector bursts in, kills everyone, and takes the would-be crook in as his latest prisoner for his collection. For those relieved the end credits have finally started rolling, there's actually an extra bit of sickening tension to be thrown off by. It turns out that poor Arkin's very much the Collector's latest prize, now trapped in a crate, screaming and crying out that one of these days he'll get payback on this bug-loving monster. For those who can stomach a sequel, the good news is that his vow of revenge is not actually totally in vain here. Number 6. The Grey. Liam Neeson's wolf-fighting chiller has grown in reputation in the years since its release. Bar some clunky dialogue, the film succeeds admirably in building a chilly, doomed atmosphere for its characters, many of whom seem to be slipping into deep existential crises. As is so often the case in horror cinema, most of the cast are no more by the climax, with just Liam Neeson's John soldiering on. In a neat, supremely bleak twist, it turns out that they were never fleeing the wolves. Instead, due to how lost in the cold they became, they wound up inadvertently moving towards the wolves' den. den, now alone and succumbing to the elements of freezing John Brave's one last stand against the fearsome predators, presumably dying in the process. Watching into the end credits, though, gives us a quick glimpse of the aftermath of his showdown with the murderous animals. The alpha wolf has been floored, and most curiously, John appears to be using its body as a pillow. Could it be that he wound up winning the fight? Well, even if he did, his survival is unlikely considering he was showing signs of hypothermia and is now no doubt even more horribly wounded. That being said, it's an intriguing notion that sticks with the viewer for some time after. It's a nicely done, thought-provoking outro to this harsh survival flick. Number 5. Terrifier 2. For general disgustingness, few films in recent memory have been more effective or more off-putting than this splatterific sequel. Art the Clown may just be the most sadistic slasher ever put to film. There's seemingly no end to his knack for cruelty and sadism. Everything from flaying, castration, and scalping to cannibalism and brutal bludgeoning, it crops up here. After coming back from the dead several increasingly ridiculous times, Art's finally sent packing near the end of the film via head removal. It's a relief knowing the utter torment of this gross-out endurance test of a movie is finally coming to an end, right? Well, for those who stick around for the end credits, though, the mayhem and general sickness isn't quite over. The final girl from the original, Victoria, is revealed, now committed to a psychiatric ward after the horrific events of the first film. It turns out that Victoria's pregnant, and what she's giving birth to is Art's head. You know, that head that just got chopped off earlier. Yeah, somehow that wound up being something Victoria needed to give birth to. Words can't even do justice to a film like this. It simply has to be seen to be believed. This is arguably the most revolting post-credit scenes in horror or any other medium. Number 4. Curse of Chucky. The ending and, by extension, post-credit scenes of this especially silly entry in the long-running Chucky franchise is a narrative mess. Preparing to transfer his soul into the human body of a young Alice Pierce, the monstrous toy's plans could well be scuppered when it turns out that Alice's grandmother is still alive despite Chucky's suffocation attempt. For the credits, the viewer initially just assumes that this is the cliffhanger for an inevitable sequel. However, a surprise scene in which the murderous toy is delivered to a new house completely turns this notion on its head. The unboxed Chucky discovers that he's in the house of a now adult Andy Barclay, the protagonist of the first 3 movies, who promptly shoots him in the face with a shotgun. It's a huge cliffhanger that seemingly negates the original cliffhanger the film ended on. Confusing and thrilling, this surprise bit of nostalgia did, if nothing else, ensure fan interest in 2017's cult of Chucky remaining high prior to its release. For those who watched on to the next film, the confusing continuity only got more bizarre when, despite having seemingly shot Chucky in the head, it's the toy's body that's gone the way of the dodo in the follow-up. It's a messy, ridiculous series for sure, but this post-credit moment had viewers everywhere talking for years. Number 3. Urban Legends Final Cut. Despite a merciless critical canning and a notable box office drop compared to its predecessor, the second Urban Legends flick boasts a surprisingly great post-credit scene. After a rather all-over-the-place climax and bait-and-switch reveal of main protagonist Amy making a film of the events that we've just watched, the credits roll as confused viewers check and discover that this isn't even the final cut of the series, which soldiered on for one more movie. The hokey, confusing events of the last Urban Legends flick to make it to cinemas are redeemed slightly for those who stick around for a bit. The newly wheelchair-bound Professor Solomon is now quite understandably committed to a home for the criminally insane following his murderous hijinks. The nurse wheeling him about is revealed to be the original film's antagonist, Brenda Bates. She informs the miserable Solomon that they have a lot in common before the film cuts to black. The scene raises many questions for viewers, including how Brenda survived the car crash and subsequent river fall in the first movie. There's also the question of how exactly she secured a job as a nurse, given her killing spree was pretty common knowledge by the end of the first film. But most importantly, it makes viewers want to know what comes next for these two antagonists. Infuriatingly, the next film in the franchise completely dropped this plot thread in favor of bizarre supernatural stories that killed this already ailing film series dead. Number 2. House on Haunted Hill. There are few fates more sadistically horrible than that of the Prices in this remake of the Vincent Price classic. A selection of colourful characters arrive for a game in a haunted house. Whoever can stay the night wins a boatload of cash. Whoever chickens out forfeits their cut. Needless to say, the house is actually haunted beyond belief by the ghosts of its time as a sinister psychiatric asylum. In the case of Jeffrey Rush's Stephen H. Price, how he winds up is especially awful given that he dies heroically trying to save some of the others in this demented asylum house conversion. After making his heroic sacrifice, we don't see him again for the rest of the film. Fast forward through some of the end credits though, and we discover the ghosts of Mr. Price and his late wife Evelyn are still at their haunted house. Worse still, as descendants of those responsible for the torture of the inmates back in the day, they now get vivisected alive by the spirits of the patients. It's just plain horrible to see, put simply. Already a dark and surprisingly effective chiller, this underrated gem's post-credits black and white footage of extreme eternal torture is even creepier than the rest of the film that we've just watched. And number 1, Dawn of the Dead 2004. Those who switched this thrilling remake of George A. Romero's classic off at the start of the end credits probably thought it was a somewhat happy ending for the surviving characters. Nope. A sit-through of the credits reveals that just about everything that could go wrong for the characters who escaped on a boat did indeed go wrong. From bugs in the food to engine failure to docking at an island that just happened to be overrun with zombies, the scenes here are just a gut punch for anyone invested in the character's survival. Throughout this montage of setbacks, Disturbed's Down with the Sickness plays, lending a furious if somewhat unsophisticated vibe to the tragic goings-on. While the true fate of those on the boat is never outright confirmed, it doesn't take a genius to piece it together. Basically, there were no survivors here. As a post-credits scene, it completely changes one view of the whole film up until that point, and essentially gives it an additional ending. Choosing whether or not to watch the end credits ultimately provides a different viewing experience, making this one of horror cinema's most compelling post-credits scenes.